Lapse the steering wheel here. Give me the steering wheel. Hey, steering wheel. Somebody tell him to give it to him. Come on. Whoa.
Your leg, my please. Your leg.
How the f*** is this possible?
I'm driving like a grandma. Get that, Ralph? Did you hear me? From the radio. Ralph, acknowledge. Now, come on, close him down and kill him. We've got a lunatic on the track down the hanging straight.
I am so annoyed.
Hello and welcome back inside the Park for May for podcast number 887. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now.
AKA Negative Camber. Tonight for your kind review, we're going to review the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix at Imola. I will, for the rest of the podcast, I'm calling it Imola. All right? So I'm just saying right now, otherwise I'll screw that up. I'm American. I can't pronounce that. So you know what we do on race weekends, though.
Seriously, Todd?
Yes, that's what we do.
We watch one, then we talk about it. Then we watch one, then we talk about it. Come on, Todd.
That's actually what we do. Before doing that, though, I have to get someone that actually knows something about racing.
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad, he's beautiful, he's crazy. It's...
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charles, the International.
Young Paul, how are you?
I'm good. Welcome back to the land of the living.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm back. Yeah, I had some kind of major surgery. And folks, just a quick thank you to all the well wishes that I got from all of you. It was great. It meant a lot to me. And it was great because, you kind of find out who your friends are when they cut you open and eviscerate your innards. And
hopefully the person with the knife is a friendly person. Too.
Yeah. He was, pleasant but quirky.
That's good.
So
quirky, a little scary.
Yeah, it was. I was a little scared, but it was good. All of you and all the well wishes, because it was good. Because I was leaning on Paul for that emotional support, and he was like, "Suck it up, Buttercup. You got to man up."
Yes.
Yeah, he's like, that's how we do things in Essex, man.
That's right. Yeah.
So Paul was
drag that leg and keep moving.
That's right.
Yeah.
Paul was not an emotional support human.
No, I'm not. Yes.
I texted him and said, I just had major surgery. He was like, meh.
I've had that a lot. I'm so cold. You're so cold.
You're so cold, Paul. Yeah. Paul was wonderful. He's not that way. He was concerned and he texted, and he was a great friend. So anyway, thank you for the well wishes. It's great to be back. Sorry, my voice is still a little scratchy. When they intubate you during surgery, when you're under general anesthetic, they jab that tube down and it wreaks all kinds of havoc. So I'm just glad I wasn't awake for that.
Yeah, I am glad I've never been under the knife. Touch wood. So
I hadn't either.
I do not want that.
I know. I hadn't either. I'll tell you. I don't know if there's listeners out there like me, but I'll tell you the thing that's tough for me is the anesthesia. I can't stand the concept of just not being in control, which is weird. You lay down and it's like, okay, good night, and you're just gone. I was like, what's happening to my body? Where are they taking me? What's going on? I have no idea.
Oh man.
So anyway, it was.
Yeah, just think about that when Carlos Sainz did was it him that had the appendectomy?
The appendectomy.
Yeah, that's not an easy thing. Anyone cuts you open, man, it's tough to recover. Yeah.
It is
mentally and physically. Yeah,
it is. It's laparoscopic surgery, and I have all these incisions and all that stuff. I won't get into the gory details, but they pump you full of air so they can work around in there, and you gotta gas that off, and it's just a mess. Yeah, it's just
I feel a little queasy right now.
I know. Yeah, here, let me show you my scars. It's crazy, man. A lot of people ask, "Oh my gosh, it was for diverticulitis." So if anybody's out there has battled that, you'll know what I've gone through. So anyway, I'm fine. I'm healing and recovering, and it's great. So thank you. And I really do apologize for missing last week's. With all the best will in the world, Paul, I wanted to get on and do a cast.
I'm sure. I know.
But Grace was terrific. She understood too. So anyway, all right. Enough about me, damn it. Let's talk about the race, shall we?
Okay.
Let's do a little formation laughs. Let's set the table here. What are we talking about, really? We're talking about Imola, right? Now, this is a tricky old school track. It's been loitering on the F1 calendar since 1981, and it was described during this broadcast weekend as a front-limited circuit with minimal passing opportunities, and I think that would be an accurate description of this track. Now, you could get a sense of that given Red Bull's struggles on Friday with Max really working hard to find the grip. He likes a very pointy car, and this is not a track that gives you a pointy car. So he was working hard with the team. And what I found interesting out of this weekend was really kind of what happened between Friday and Saturday. What Red Bull did in the simulator work between Friday and Saturday was very interesting to watch. They had to correlate the upgrades they brought to this race weekend with the amount of grip that the chassis inherently was interested in providing them. So they had to correlate all this. They had to figure out how to get around this and get this car close enough to Max and what he would like, knowing it's not going to be perfect. And it wasn't. And yet he put it on pole. And I think that's a Max factor there. That's why they pay him the big bucks.
So I missed it. Obviously, we were racing this weekend at Coda. Did they show what they were doing with the sim, or how did you get this?
No,
they were just telling you.
Yeah, it was Sebastian Buemi. I think he did like an 11-hour shift in the simulator back at Milton Keynes.
Because a couple of drivers I know very, very well who still do that sim testing for the Formula One. So every team is doing the same thing.
Yep.
You know, from Mercedes to Sauber to whatever. So I said a couple of good friends of mine are actually the drivers and they bring different drivers in each weekend to be the sim driver. And sometimes, it can be some days can be harder than others, but if you're there and that's your nominated weekend to be the sim correlation driver, you can do a lot of hours on those things to try and fix those cars. And literally they do it when the practice 2 is over, or practice 3, they drive through the night. So there's, they've got to make up that time between the sessions to try and fix it so they have a better setup for when they go back out on track the next day.
I'll tell you what's also interesting, Paul, is that let's just say you were going to do some work for, I don't know, pick Alonso. If you were going to do some work for Alonso, you're not going to get in that sim and give and provide feedback to get the car to handle the way you want it. You have to get the car to handle the way that Alonso wants it. So you got to know what Alonso wants.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And the engineers on both sides need to be able to figure that out too. Cause they don't lay it all in the driver's hands to, who can drive like Alonso, right?
Yeah.
But in general, as we've talked about with test drivers before, their job is to be the consistent cog in the wheel, and they change things on the car to try and make it feel different, but the driver still has to be super consistent and not really adapt to anything other than what the car is actually giving them. You don't, if the car's understeering a little bit, that driver is not supposed to then just start cracking on the throttle and doing their little techniques. They've still got to kind of drive up to the level that the car is performing at, not necessarily what their ultimate performance can be.
Right. Yeah, I found that really interesting because whatever they did between Friday and Saturday showed evidence on Saturday's free practice that they'd improved it, and then they made tweaks on Saturday, and then Max put it on pole. So it's kind of a complete package thing there that I thought was noteworthy. Also, Friday and Saturday also suggested that McLaren's pace in Miami was real and less of a track-specific performance gain that McLaren had by the Miami circuit and more of an overall net gain by the team. And so you thought, well, that's there. And then Ferrari brought up grades. They held off on Miami. They brought him this weekend, home Grand Prix in Italy. They looked racy, competitive on Friday and Saturday. And, we head into Sunday thinking we may have a really good three-way battle here. Red Bull's a little on the back foot, struggling. McLaren's pace seems real, and Ferrari look very competitive too. I was thinking this could be an interesting weekend. And I think on the balance of it, while the race would sort of betray my comment here, I do think it was kind of an interesting race from that standpoint.
Yeah.
Just to see where everybody lies.
Yeah, definitely a pace comparison wise, it was not necessarily in, race massive passes, but I mean, the Ferrari really wasn't that far behind the lead either. No.
Right.
On other races not so long ago, you would have said that was the closest anyone's ever got to Red Bull, where Ferrari were in third place, right? So, definitely the gap is closing. I think we harked on that in Miami, Miami. I'm going to go put Miami on my sandwich. But no, we were alluding to, was it just track specific? And we thought it was both. And it seems to have turned out that way. Certainly when we know what kind of car that Max likes, right?
Yeah.
And some other drivers that also struggle with that need would struggle here, hence Alonso, things like that. So I thought it was encouraging in the fact that the top three are closing in. Mercedes still, of course, being left behind a wee bit. Yeah,
exactly. And I'm also not sure where Formula One, or at least the broadcast, is getting their stats. They were saying before the race that there's 100% chance of a safety car.
Well,
really?
100%.
How'd you get that math?
Yes.
I don't know how that comes.
Glad I didn't lay that bet.
Yeah, I didn't either. Let's talk about the teams. Let's talk about how they finished. Let's start at the top, sharp end of the grid. We're going to start with Red Bull, Max Verstappen in P1, Sergio Perez languishing down in P8. As I said, Max was struggling this weekend with grip, so he put it on pole. That was a massive achievement. And while he initially gained a 7-second advantage over the field in the initial stint, the hard compounds were less effective for him. In the closing laps, Max's hards were really struggling, allowing Lando to close in to about within a second of Max. And thankfully for Max, they ran out of laps. The race ended and he took home the victory, but it wasn't without a challenge. And certainly Max was pushing hard to stay up there. I do think, again, I think this is the Max factor. This is why they pay him what they pay him. If I'm honest, it's what he's paid, why he's paid, the amount he's paid,
right?
And I think that's the reality of it. But it made it a race of it. The first stint, everybody's kind of like watching the race, and then come to the second stint, and Lando is complaining that he has no pace, and they said, yeah, but everybody's abusing their tires ahead of you, and we're managing tires. And the reality is, and then he started closing Max in, and everybody's on the edge of their seat. Ooh, we got a race, right?
Yeah.
So it was interesting. But I think overall, it's easy to overlook what Max pulled together this weekend. I thought it was a brilliant run.
Yeah, it was a brilliant run. And by the team, as you say, they turned the car around, and it was only 1 second between winning and losing. So all the strategy, what they were doing on the medium tires, when they were pitting, all these things came into play to fight off the McLaren that was closing in on them. So the pace they had on the mediums was important to get a little bit of gap. If there had been that 100% guaranteed safety car after they all came in and hards, I think, and closed up Lando, it would have been a different story perhaps. But because Lando did knock out like 6 seconds off of the gap. I mean, that is not an insignificant feat to do, right. But and obviously there's also some. Max is a very, very smart driver at this point, and he can save a little bit of tire even though the gap is closing, knowing that when Lando gets up close, the dirty air does make it harder and harder the closer he gets to him, right? So you save your better, let him close, but then save everything you've got for those last 3 laps, which I thought was scintillating. I thought it was great to watch. Yeah, I
did too. And it's that old saying, it's a dog-eared phrase, but Lando catching Max is one thing, getting around him would have been a different deal. And I think you're right. If you're not to sound like a Max fanboy, but if you're thinking that Max is a dullard or not that smart, I think he's a wickedly smart driver. He knows what the hell's going on. He's very aware.
Yeah, and to deal with that pressure, it's always harder to lead. I mean, for him, he's led so much. I think he's pretty experienced to making it work. But it is very hard to lead without making one little mistake. You got your eyes in the back of your head and seeing an orange car get closer and closer. It'd be very easy to make the tiniest mistake, which he didn't do, and didn't give Lando a look in. So very impressive.
Yeah, it was. Sergio, a tougher weekend, had poor qualifying, leaving him to start on the hards. He ran long, but that didn't really pay off for him in the end. And it's kind of I'm hesitant to say it was a team strategy issue or a Sergio issue. It's just kind of the nature of the track and limited passing opportunities. They ran him long. You might ask why they didn't box him earlier, but I think had they done that, he would have come out in serious traffic that would have really hindered his ability to come back. So they were waiting because the pit stop delta was damn near half a minute, right? And so with that long of a pit stop delta, really, it comes down to a couple things. Your strategy's got to be right when you box. The undercut might be powerful, which a couple teams proved that it worked. And then with Sergio, they ran him long, but they couldn't. I think they were limited on changing up his strategy because of the amount of traffic and what he would have come out in. And I think that's kind of the difficulty. This left him boxing late, working. But once he did, though, he did work his way through traffic. He was able to reach up to P8, couldn't quite reach the Mercedes duo, unfortunately, and he finished P8. Not the weekend I'm sure he wanted, not the weekend Red Bull wanted for him, but it all started in that qualifying. And if you thought Max was struggling, which he clearly was all weekend, Sergio was struggling very much with the same thing. And all of that sim work would have been spent on figuring out how to get the car like Max wants it, right? Not necessarily how to figure out 100% how to get it like Sergio wants it.
Yeah, I mean, the qualifying was crucial for Sergio, as it has been on too many occasions, quite honestly. He puts himself on the back foot. You get to a track that you can't pass on. Your strategy is very limited. I'm sure the reason they went long was hoping for some kind of VSC or safety car or something. Be able to leapfrog cars, because even if the Red Bull is the quickest thing, but you're on a track like this, really hard to pass, you're not going to just charge up to the front. It's just not going to happen. So I think they ran long just to try and get an opportunity to get a cheap pit stop and leap them ahead of people, and then maybe Sergio could have been fighting for it, with a decent tire, but it just wasn't to be because it was a full green race. So Red Bull have a lot of thinking to do right now, through its 4 cars, really. I mean, Sergio's not really getting it done. And how long do they hold out? And what is their plan should they decide to replace him? And they have to be thinking about that now. And the 2 drivers they've got in line at their other team aren't probably who they really want. So that just kind of barrel rolls, right? Is there anyone on the grid, or is Lawson their golden child that could possibly be there? But they have to give him a chance to drive. So then there's a whole big shuffle thing. So the whole Sergio thing is quite complicated and difficult for them to manage at this point. Also, Newey's leaving. They're a little ace in the hole that could possibly, we don't care. The second car will finish fairly well because we've got Max and an Adrian Newey car. That's no longer. They don't have that given that they're going to have a great car even next year or even later in this year. So
there's certainly a lot of conversation about that, with both Zach Brown and Toto Wolff saying they're getting CVs from all kinds of people at Red Bull. I don't have insider information, but it does make one wonder if this isn't a slow unraveling of Red Bull.
Right.
Makes you wonder.
It does.
And could McLaren be the team poised to make that jump, or will it be Ferrari? A lot of people think Ferrari was the natural to take a step up, but right now McLaren's doing a yeoman's job.
Yeah.
So it's a tough situation over there for sure, and I think for them, Paul, if you guys show up in the harder racing Aston Martin and you're at a track and the front of that Vantage is just not, you're constantly waiting on that chassis and waiting to turn in. And you got a driver who likes a pointy front, you're chasing that thing. I mean, how do you overcome that? I mean, you guys don't have the aero that a Formula One car has.
No.
But, how do you get on top of that?
Yeah. I mean, there's several ways to do it. We don't have the aero Formula One car, but we do have aero balance. We have front aero, rear aero. We can change the rake of the car. We can do some things with bars, with the dampers, how they work, how they respond, etc. There's several ways, but usually, especially in a GT car, it's kind of got an inherent way to be, and you kind of, we can't make the Aston drive like a rear engine Acura, right? Which Mario Fumbacher, he drove the Acuras for like 6 years. He's having a hard time, even though he's still going quick. He's still trying to mentally get around driving a car that's got a front engine. So it is different. So there's several things you can do. Even the driver can manipulate things. I know Roman likes a pointy car, but he's adapted a driving style that really no one else on the team really can do to make the car work that way. So there's as I said, dampers, change the bars, change the rake, change the aero, lower the rear wing, all kinds of things. But every action has a reaction, right? It can be a positive to getting the car to turn in, but then the car in slower corners, but then that makes the car, trying to kill you in fast corners, vice versa. So
it's a knock on. You're constantly chasing that balance. Setup on a car is such a compromise because you're not going through the same turn all the time. Every turn, every track has 16 corners, and you have to figure out, okay, which ones do we prioritize? And sometimes you have to give up a couple of ill-handling corners to make the ultimate lap work for you. Yeah, it's amazing. McLaren, Lando Norris, P5, Oscar Piastri, P2, I'm sorry. Oscar Piastri in P4. Oscar had a tough qualifying session. He got that penalty for blocking Magnussen. That dropped him back 3 places at the start. Now, he managed to recover up to P4, but I have to wonder what he might have done had he not had that penalty and started in his original starting position of P2. He looked very quick this weekend. As it was, though, he was stuck behind Carlos, lost a lot of time on that first stint. McLaren brought him in. They did the undercut to get rid of Sainz, and it worked. But then he just basically ran out of tires to hunt down Lando in the closing laps and finish in P4. Kind of a quiet race, not a lot of talk about Oscar, but I think on balance, he did really well this weekend, given what was going on. A little surprised he couldn't get around Carlos sooner. Mm-hmm. But then again, this isn't a prolific passing track, and Carlos may have just, Carlos is a wily veteran out there. He knows what he's doing, and probably
right for sure. Yeah, and as Lando was saying, they struggled a bit on the mediums, and that was ultimately what he was on when he was trying to get rid of Carlos, and maybe Carlos's car was maybe a bit better in that first compound run. It was good. It just shows you how little errors can just destroy your weekend in a way, right? I mean, just that one little blocking pedal, 3 places on a track that is hard to pass. He could have been hunting down Max just as well as Lando could have, quite honestly. Obviously, right? So
I think he could have.
Those are things that you just go home and you just bang your head against the wall, saying, why do we? Why weren't we on top of that? Because it's such a simple thing to be on top of, right? Especially in the qualifying when you're not going on a lap, you're not gaining or even going for anything. So, tough deal. But they'll go back and analyze it.
And it seems obvious, qualifying is important, and it is. But even this year we've seen, Sergio or Oscar or a few of these drivers that, Daniel or whoever, you have a tough qualifying and it's just over. There's just not a lot of recovery from that. And it's why it makes it so critical to get the qualifying. You got to get the qualifying right. if you get it right and then you cock it up during the race, well, okay, then you cocked it up. But to not get the qualifying right, you never have the opportunity to cock it up or be a hero,
Yep.
And it's tough. Lando on the other side of the garage, Lando seemed to slot into P2, and this seemed to be his finishing, running in his second stint. He was complaining about the lack of pace as Leclerc was closing in on him, but you definitely got the sense that his team was right, that the cars ahead of him were harder on their tires. He was managing the tires. That's why he was running the pace he was running. And then after a little while, towards the end of the race, he came alive. I mean, he devoured a 5-second lead in pretty short order and was within a second of Max Verstappen. Unfortunately, he just ran out of laps. But it's a massive points haul from him and for McLaren with the P2 and P4 finish. And I'd argue that the cat is squarely amongst the pigeons at this point with Ferrari. And I would say that Ferrari right now is on the back foot comparatively to McLaren in a straight, head-to-head mix. And I think that that's an issue. That's something Ferrari's got to be worried about. In fact, I mean, if Red Bull's still struggling going forward, they're going to pick off wins, just like they did in Miami. And I think Ferrari are the ones who should be more concerned than Red Bull. But, it's if Red Bull has too many more of these weekends, track specific, they're going to lose.
Yeah.
And I think McLaren are thereabouts. And I'm saying that as a Ferrari fan, I'm elated for McLaren. I just think their turnaround has been amazing.
Yeah, and this is why one of the reasons I love Formula One and why I don't panic when there's some kind of domination going on.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this is what you love to see. It's like
fun.
Yeah, they dig the technical side of Formula One is massive, right? It's a big part of why we watch the show, why the cars are so fast. And when someone can pick themselves up from the back row of the Formula One grid just over a year ago, right? First race of the year last year, to winning. And I mean, that's impressive and that's fun to see and fun to watch, and seeing a dominant team get caught and get past, and then, just having a fight for their life as well. This is Formula One, as they say. And that's why I love it. So that's why, when people start squawking, I'm not going to watch it again. It's like, come on, keep watching. Yeah. It's coming, and here they come. And I think McLaren are making, I think it's going to ebb and flow a little bit. Who's going to attack Red Bull between McLaren and Ferrari? And I think maybe at some point we're going to see McLaren and Ferrari ahead of both Red Bulls at a race this year. So it's all looking good, I think. And,
it's great. It's fun.
Kudos to those guys.
Exactly. When you think about McLaren, I know there's a lot of Lewis fans that were sad in to see Mercedes fall from grace after 8 years of domination. But that's kind of what F1 is. It's team sport. And as much as you like to see on any given Sunday anybody win a F1 race, it's not a reality. It never has been in Formula One. It's team against team. And that's where the big money's paid too. So to watch a team rise to the pinnacle like Mercedes did for 8 years and then watch Red Bull overcome them is amazing. And watch Red Bull struggle now. And the hint that McLaren, who just took a Toto Wolff supplied engine and is beating Mercedes with their own engine in a year and a half, and what they've been able to turn around, it's a wonderful, wonderful story. I think it's fantastic.
It is.
And then to watch Ferrari struggling all these years, and Fred Vasseur, who admittedly, I was not 100% convinced that Fred's the guy, but he might be. They're heading in the right direction, so you never know. I think that's the fun of this series.
Absolutely.
Speaking of Ferrari, let's talk about them. Charles Leclerc, P3, Carlos Sainz, P5. Carlos seemed to struggle in the last couple of races compared to his start of this season. I find that a little interesting. I'm not exactly sure why. I guess I could argue that maybe the upgrades they've been bringing to the car maybe haven't settled well with Carlos. I'm not quite sure why. He started really strong at the beginning of the year, and now he seems to be struggling in comparison to teammate Charles Leclerc. He struggled to stay ahead of Piastri during this race, eventually losing to the undercut that McLaren pulled, had no pace to stay with Leclerc, and ended up down in P5. Carlos even himself, a little more critical this weekend in his comments. He wasn't being a jerk, but I think he was just saying, that he thinks the upgrades they brought were overestimated in the impact they were and the effectiveness that they were going to have, and suggested that they're definitely not going to be enough for Monaco. So, not exactly happy with where he's at right now. And a little bit of a different Carlos than we saw in the first handful of races.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this evolves, because as you were talking about with Max struggling, and they're gonna focus on the simulator, getting the car right for Max, and Sergio's just gonna deal with whatever they got. You got to think at some point that's what Ferrari are going to be going for with Leclerc versus Sainz, right? Why keep developing a car for Sainz's style,
right,
when their guy is Leclerc? In my experience in the GT racing, we have multiple drivers, and we're always trying to put a car together that they could all live with.
Right.
And we were talking about compromises. That doesn't necessarily mean that we have the car that who could be the faster driver on that weekend, and you've put all the focus on them because the other drivers are going to be off because that's not their style. So you always compromise on making sure the car works for all the drivers.
Yeah.
But in this situation, you're probably not going to do that at all. You're going to focus on the person who you think who is taking you to the future, and focusing on that. So I think it's probably going to get worse for Carlos rather than better. This is just a speculation thing, but it's definitely something that's going to evolve, even if it isn't associated with what's going on right now. I think that's definitely a story to watch.
Yeah, I do too. I think watch this space. No mystery. Carlos is looking for a different ride, and I'm sure he's got options. So his commentary about Ferrari, their upgrades not being that great, and those kind of things, I think you're going to see a little more of Carlos being maybe a little more candid about some of those things, because he really doesn't have much to lose.
Right.
He doesn't need to try to gloss over anything for Ferrari because he's being...
The meat sauce in the catering is crap.
The facility is
I've
terrible.
suffered it for 3 years now.
It's an Italian team. They can't make lasagna for crap. It's terrible. Let's talk about Charles. Charles had some pace in the second stint, and then he ran over that curb pretty hard, went off, cut the chicane. His hard tires started losing grip there. He started to drop back. He was closing on Lando, but then he ran out of tires.
Yeah, tried to hang on, and there wasn't anything left.
Yeah. So despite having good pace, those hards just weren't going to last. And the McLaren, he said, was just too quick, bottom line. And that's where he finished. Mercedes, you had Lewis Hamilton P6, George Russell P7. Toto said that he felt that the team basically had the pace to be 6-7. That's exactly where they finished. So Toto Wolff, also known as the Delphic Oracle, knew exactly where his cars had finished. Good on him. I think that was good. Lewis and George dropped out of the top 5 early on. They weren't really considered runners for that top 5. Settled into that 6-7 position, holding everyone behind them off, though they definitely had the pace for that. Lewis had an off, little spooky at the time. And I think for me, it was a bit of a head scratcher to box George late, ceding P6 to Lewis. I'm not quite, at the time, I didn't know why they were doing that. The team ended up saying that their data suggested that he might struggle to get to the end on his hards. So they had a window, and they thought they'd go ahead and box him and keep him ahead of Perez, and then George would, get the fastest lap, which he did. I don't know. I'm still thinking if I'm George, I'd rather have P6.
I don't know what data they're looking at that associated that. I mean, maybe it's real data. Maybe they decided to consolidate and make sure they get an extra point, and they don't really care who finishes in 6th or 7th or 7th or 6th. I don't know.
Maybe they don't. I think George does. And this kind of goes
George
back to
would know for sure.
Yeah. And this kind of goes back to what you're saying about Ferrari and Carlos. Lewis is on his way out.
Yeah.
Why would you do something to hobble George?
Yeah.
George is your guy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're going to hobble anybody and not really work overnight on a strategy, you'd do that for Lewis's side, but you wouldn't do it to George.
Yeah, it's not an easy decision to make. I mean, I said, not knowing the data, not knowing the feedback they were getting, maybe it was a real thing, and
maybe it was.
They consolidated it, but difficult to give up a position when you aren't necessary. I don't know how was George that much longer on the hards than Lewis was.
I mean, you're absolutely spot on. I mean, maybe the data they're looking at is he's showing real high degradation of the hards, and they thought he was going to be a sitting duck.
Right.
So they had a window, boxed him, and made sure he finished P7 and got fastest lap. And maybe that was actually a far better move in Mercedes' defense. It just, at the time, I was thinking, I don't know why they would do that, but yeah. Let's see. Aston Martin, Lance Stroll P9, Fernando Alonso P19. Fernando started from pit lane due to making suspension changes overnight. So that left him starting from pit lane. They boxed him early to get off the softs that he started on. His brakes were on fire. That was that was exciting. Wasn't good. Never good to go in and pull new tires and you got flames coming out of your front wheel. But that went out. He boxed 2 more times, Paul, and they even tried to get the fastest lap, but he couldn't beat Russell. And at that point, they just, it was game over. Alonso said it, this weekend was more of a practice session and a data harvesting session than a race for him.
Yeah, I think he probably was, because starting that far back, as we know, very tough track to pass on. Difficult decision to make that they were just going to do a test session instead of a race session, which would equate to all the different pit stops and starting on the softs, and how they actually ran the race. They really ran it like a race test rather than anything else, and that's why they changed all the suspension. Maybe it wasn't even optimized for Imola. I don't know. But yeah, all the bad things that happened in the practice kind of barrel rolled into pretty much riding off the whole weekend before the race started.
Yeah, and I think that the upgrades that they brought, whether they're an evolutionary upgrade set that a complementary second set comes to sort of bring things around, I don't know. They kind of alluded to that.
Yeah.
They would know. I don't, but I think, it's not working. Although, I say that Lance had a better race. He had a better day. He had a similar strategy to Perez, going long on his mediums to try to give him some fresher tires towards the end. And he did have that. It allowed him to muscle his way up into the points, up into P9. He was happy about that. So, all things considered, given the overall balance or pace of Aston Martin in general, in aggregate over the weekend, I think a P9 was all right. But I do think, I think they've got a lot of work to do at Aston at this point. Yeah,
it seems to be slipping away just a wee bit. Obviously, they're still building their empire. Wind tunnel, they use Mercedes wind tunnel right now, but they're building their own, which is not only they're just waiting to get that going, but obviously that's a resource that they have to be funding, and personnel they have to adhere to and everything like that. So bigger picture, perhaps. But they definitely don't seem to be they're losing ground, not gaining ground at this moment.
Yeah. Yep. Let's see. Daniel Ricciardo P13, Yuki Tsunoda P10. Yuki got lodged behind Hülkenberg at the start and was really losing time. So the team gambled. They boxed him early for an undercut, and it worked. It worked a treat. Got him out ahead of Hulk, and then from there, Yuki was able to claw his way into the points and up into P10, which for the team was a great result to get back up there. the team felt he may have even had pace to finish higher, but that wasn't to be ultimately due to both drivers had poor starts, lost positions at the start, and ultimately put him in the position they were in. They fought back, some good strategy, moved Yuki into the points. Yuki, incredibly pleased with himself, but on balance, it is a okay weekend for them.
Yeah, it's 1 point. I think they're maybe a little ambitious, think they could have done any better. I think they got as good as they can get, really.
Yeah. That's kind of how I read that too.
I don't know. Yeah, as you get further back in the pack here, there's so little you could say about it. Everyone's they're all just kind of weak at this point and fighting with pillows rather than knives at this back there. So
I know in the end, it's just
Not good enough, damn it! Not good enough.
Yeah, it's just not
I mean, when you see a picture of Yuki with the board, it was the last time he did it with P10 and all the team are behind him. Yeah, it's like, oof. Grading on the curve there, my friend. Grading on the curve. I'm not sure I would ever want that photo op. Yay, we're 10th.
Yay, we got a point.
Like,
Yeah. Well, Daniel was going head-to-head with Sergio briefly, but ultimately he dropped down behind Magnussen, finishing P13. Daniel blamed dirty air, poor start, other things, and it's becoming sort of a recurring theme with Daniel. He's, in the clean air, we were great, and sort of thing. It's tough. I think I'm wondering if the team, at this point, Paul, and I love Daniel as much as the next guy. I think he's terrific. But I'm wondering if the team may not take a punt here and make some changes mid-season. It's just not working.
Right. I mean, that's as we talked about earlier, right? It's like it's not just about VCarb or whatever the name is. It's about the Red Bull big team. I mean, neither of these guys are really showing anything that I would think would be like, oh yeah, let's replace Sergio, even though Sergio's not doing that great. You're like, well, what do you replace mediocre with mediocre? I don't. What's the point in that?
If it was me, I think I'd sit Dan down, put Liam in, see if Liam potentially would set the world on fire to maybe replace Sergio.
Yeah, I think they need to, because I think they don't have that many bullets in their gun anymore. They used to have a plethora of Red Bull drivers, and they got rid of some of the really good ones, unfortunately, right? And then there's no one in their line. There's some really good drivers and some other manufacturers' driver lineups that aren't on the grid yet, but will be. But Red Bull don't really have that except for Lawson. So I think it's sooner than later to see if Lawson can bring a spark.
Yeah.
He can jump in, start beating Yuki off the bat, then that will make their life just that little bit easier.
Yeah, he's your guy. Haas F1, Nico Hülkenberg, P11, Kevin Magnussen, P12. Both Nico and Kevin had good starts. Both of them gained 2 spots on the start. Great on him, but Nico couldn't hold off the Aston Martin of Lance Stroll or the Red Bull of Sergio, and was undercut by Yuki, leaving him just out of the points. So it was unfortunate, but he had good pace. He looked pretty good. I thought early on he was going to get in the points. I thought he'd nip into P10 maybe, but that undercut by Yuki, kind of put
those pesky Haas boys.
Yeah,
here come the Haas boys.
Yes, so
causing trouble, ruffling feathers.
I know, exploiting the rules, Kevin.
Yeah, but still, I mean, still Haas are encouraging from what they were last year. So 11th and 12th would have been like a win last year, honestly. And they're diving into the top 10s in qualifyings and in the races and things like that. So I don't think it all is lost. Not something to be too upset with if you're on the Haas team, I would say.
No, I agree. I think, look, you're just out of the points, and that's frustrating. But I think exactly what you said, Paul. I think in aggregate, when you look at the gain that Haas made, they're fighting for point.
Yeah.
Compare to that to last year, nowhere, right? Sorry.
Right.
Wasn't planning on the dog being the soundtrack of this podcast, so sorry about that. So I think that's the reality of it, and I think you got to take the positives out of that. Kevin had a good fight back through the field all the way up to P12, kept his nose clean. I thought that was good. His long first stint worked well for him. Ultimately, stopping as late as Kevin did was risky, and they lost out on the points. But the team praised Kevin, said he had a great run back up to P12, given where they were. They say, and I like it that that the team came out after the race and said, look, boxing Nico early. With the rate of the hard compound degradation probably on us. We gambled risky with Kevin, maybe not the best strategy. I think they were basically saying, look, I think in aggregate, we could have done a little better with the strategy overall for the weekend for both drivers, but I think they finished well.
Yeah.
Alpine, Pierre Gasly, P16, Esteban Ocon, P14. Pierre started on the softs and boxed early, but then discovered that he had very high degradation on the hards, and he boxed again, which put him toward the back of the field. Difficult to recover from there. I think kind of like Haas, I think maybe Alpine in total sort of maybe got the strategy a little off on both drivers here, and it certainly didn't favor Pierre.
Yeah, I mean, pace fixes a lot of things. They don't have it.
Yeah, right.
A little mistake, mistake like that, and as I said, it is close in the midfield pack, even though but they're definitely not attacking the top 10. So one little snafu here and there, and you're fighting out for 15th.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Esteban clashed early on. He clashed with Stroll in the beginning, but was able to continue, saying that they simply lacked pace everywhere and the pace to be competitive at this point. They tried to run Esteban on on the opening stint. They tried to run him long, and to your point, Paul, they were looking for a safety car.
Yeah.
And look, everybody assured him it was 100% chance of safety car. Why wouldn't you bank?
It's coming, I swear.
Oh, it's coming any minute. We're gonna have that.
Yeah, that guy Tony back here. He told me it was 100. What?
Yeah.
Hey, anyone seen Tony? Where did Tony go?
Yeah. It's
made
the
a runner.
Amazon Web Service stats team working for us back there, assuring us that it was 100%.
Yeah.
It never came, never materialized. The big rumor for Esteban out of the whole weekend is that he's a possible candidate for Haas next year. So watch this space.
Wow.
Really? I don't know. If Alpine's upset with the drivers, you're focusing on the wrong syllable.
Oh, for sure.
Trust me. Your drivers aren't the issue there. Kick Sauber in the nuts. Kick Sauber. Soon
Every
to be
weekend
Audi.
they seem to be kicked.
Yes. Valtteri Bottas and P18, Zhou Guanyu P15. They split the strategy at Sauber with Zhou running on hards, Valtteri running on mediums. Bottas was in the train of cars, so they boxed him earlier than planned. This left him on hards for 53 laps. Not quite sure who at Sauber thought that would be a good idea, but it didn't pay dividends for Valtteri. Meanwhile, Valtteri was seen down at Williams. May I have another job, sir? May I have some more, sir?
I still got my gear. You don't even have to buy me new gear.
I still have my Williams, Nomex suit. I could just,
I was
slip right in here.
Yeah, I was a friend of Claire's. Does anyone remember? Yeah.
Patty Lowe and I were like this. So anyway.
Sorry, we don't remember you.
And Joe had a few scraps on tracks, couldn't really mount any challenge for Ocon late in the race. So,
I plead the fifth. No comment.
Yeah. Very similar review of Williams. Alex Albon DNF, Logan Sargent P17. Alex boxed early on the hards, but the team didn't get the tires on securely, so he came back in. They had to change the tires, put on mediums. There goes his one set of hards. Gone for one lap at slow pace. And then he trundled around 2 laps down. They just
wonder why they couldn't just secure the wheel.
Yeah, I was wondering why they didn't take the wheel off and put it back on, at least try to reseat it and see if it's seated correctly.
Right.
Maybe they took it off and said, "Oh, this whole nut and."
Maybe this the time it takes to look. It could have been a wheel problem that. Yeah, maybe. It may as well just screw him.
Why are we buying BBS again? These things suck. So anyway, who knows? And then Logan, he was in a DRS train for the whole first half of the race. once they'd boxed him, he was able to get by Bottas. So woo, and that was about it. So it was a weekend to forget.
Yeah. Speaking of DRS trains, my favorite subject, I think they need to change that up a little bit. And I don't think car after car after, because you're seeing in line car after car after car after car with DRS open, DRS open, DRS open. Yeah. I think they need to make, you can't have 3 cars in a line with DRS. I think it should be every other car. Yeah, that might break up those trains. You know what I'm saying?
You can't up the train.
Yeah, if you can't have 2 cars with DRS directly behind each other. You
can't have more than 2 cars with DRS open in a line.
Right.
Is what you're saying, yeah.
Right. Yeah. So even if you're within a second, you can't have DRS because the car ahead of you has DRS.
The 2 cars ahead of you are in a DRS battle. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got an idea. Let's just get rid of it.
Yeah, let's do that. Bring back the Hanford device.
Yeah. Let's just get rid of it, and then we'll just make some real tires that last a whole race that are super grippy, and let them race. So anyway.
Do you remember that Hanford device they had in IndyCar?
Do I?
Yeah.
Say some more?
We were talking about it this weekend, and it was basically like an upside down gurney flap on the back, and it just made this big pocket of air, behind the drive. So slipstreaming was massive on the Indy cars.
I remember that. What years was that, Paul?
I can't remember. It was a while back. They had it for a couple of years, I think, and then they did away with it. Maybe it was to do with the merger with IRL. I can't remember, but yeah, it caused a significant hole in the air for the car behind. Let's say that, right?
Yeah, I do remember that. It's been a while. All right, let's give out some awards of this podcast. First one is always do Move the Race.
Yes, I can hear you, Clem Fandango.
All right. Move the Race. What'd you have? It's slim pickings here.
Well, it could have been that McLaren fan in the stands. That was a move.
Yeah.
No, I'm giving it to the last few laps duel, even though we didn't really see any moves, but I think that was the most intriguing and fun part for me in the entire race, seeing those 2 guys go, mano a mano on the track, just trying to eke out every little 100th, 10th of a second, living life on the edge the whole time. I thought that was just awesome for both of them. So they both get it for that duel.
And I know I'm a Ferrari fan, but man, isn't it fun to watch Lando start to bubble to the top?
It's fun to listen to Lando too.
It is.
The verbal stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is stuff. I'm trying, man. Come on.
I'm trying. Come on,
shut up.
When they started to tell him what something, he goes, yeah, I see him.
Yeah.
I can see Max. I know what's going on.
Yeah. Lando, you could go faster in turn 9. I'm going as fast as I can, man. I mean, what do you think I'm doing? Leaving something on the table? Yeah.
It's so fun to watch him bubble to the top. And I got to be honest, I think the UK's got a new F1 hero in him. I really do. He's just, I don't know, he's quirky, he's different, he's, I don't know, he's just a lot of fun to watch. I'm super excited. As a Ferrari fan, I want to see Charles Leclerc up there. And I'm a big fan of George Russell, too. I think George is great. But it's just fun. I think Lando is just quirky enough to have that sort of je ne sais quoi, about him.
Absolutely. Yep.
Kind of makes him different. I think Max is different, and people love to hate him, but he's a bit off,
What he is, I think, but behind the scenes, I think he's a lot more of a humorous person than he is on.
Too.
He's kind of got this Kimi Räikkönen thing. It's like when the camera's on, it's like I don't like any of you.
Yeah.
Reporters
I think personally,
I'm not going to give you my time.
I think you're absolutely right. I think Max is really funny and personable with his friend groups, and I think he and Lando get along like a house on fire,
Yeah.
And so I think that's great. And I just love, super happy for all the men and women of Woking. They have bore this cross for a long time. Not that Ferrari haven't, and I'm starting to sound like a McLaren fan. I am a McLaren fan, but I just think it's great. It's great.
Yeah.
So my move of the race was for the Ukester. He's been beaten up by you enough. And so I think the Euxer needs a little love. And I think the Euxer did a great move with that undercut on Hulkenberg because it allowed him to overcome his deficit at the start and claw into the points. So good on him.
Okay.
That was my move of the race. All right, next award is Donkey of the Race.
We'll do it live.
Not good enough, damn it. Not good enough.
All right, Donkey of the Race, Paul. What do you got?
I'm going to have to give it to the man I usually give move of the race or drive of the race to, and that's Fernando Alonso and the Aston Martin team. Sorry, my fellow Aston Martiners. But
but the whole rest of the field was just...
It was a mess.
They were in a different category.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a messy, bad weekend that I'm sure Fernando wants to forget.
But good on Lance for pulling out P9.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I agree with you. And then the final award is always Drive of the Race.
Get in there, Lewis.
Oh, yeah, Drive of the Race.
Get down. Get down.
Yes, Paul, Drive of the Race. Who do you have?
I'm giving it to Lando.
Good shout.
Yeah.
That is a great call. I think he did win Driver of the Race.
Yeah, I wonder what they think of when they say it, because they always even mention it in the, in the interviews at the end. And guess what? You won Driver of the Race. They're just like, okay.
Ah. Okay.
Does that give me more points? Do I get more money? What? Yeah. No, but it's our hype point. There we go.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm giving to Max. I think Max had a tough weekend overall. Yeah. What he was able to achieve, what that team was able to achieve, the strategy, he had to execute it. I think he drove his backside off, and we just don't know it.
Yeah, for sure he did.
Yeah, I think that's really what was going on. He's not going to say it, and neither is the team. But I think they drove their butts off this weekend to take
fun to watch.
And I think it was a hell of a lot of fun to watch. So let's see. Let's do some mailbag.
You've got mail.
Andrew Page, our good friend Andrew Page, asked this question for both of us.
Okay.
With the sad news that Adrian has moved on and is not allowed to touch the Red Bull, we can now see all... we can now all stop the talk that, well, it's because Adrian designed the car. Is it a coincidence that just 1 week later on, the best team ever, McLaren, are now on top? Some bold words there, Andrew.
That is some bold words, and it's a bit early to say that. Was Newey on the wall? I don't think he was, right? I
didn't see him.
Is that an official... I don't think he was on the wall. I don't know. Is that an official statement that he's not going to be back on the wall the whole season?
If I'm Christian, I make him fulfill the rest of it. I put his butt at every single race, every single wall, every single time. I grind him to the ground.
Squeeze every little bit out of him.
Exactly.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Your butt's on the wall. You're going to every single damn race. I'm going to wear you out. When I'm done with you, you're going to want to take a year or two off just to recover.
Yeah, so it's hard to know what the actual limits are for Adrian right now. I think one weekend is a little bit. We've even seen it in the Newey era. Obviously, Newey's been a Red Bull for a long time. He didn't build the best car every year.
No.
Has of late for sure, but even then, a couple of tracks, Singapore, things like that, the car doesn't always work. So I think it's a little too early to say that. It will have an effect, but a lot of the groundwork is done. The DNA of Adrian Newey is in that car, right? Yeah. So
it's going to be evolved.
Yeah, it's going to be a gradual evolution, and hopefully for Red Bull's sake, the evolution is smooth and they keep that level. There's a lot of people who have worked underneath Adrian Newey. Probably learned a whole lot from him.
Smart people,
right? Yeah.
I wrote an editorial several years ago when everyone was talking about Adrian. For all the right reasons, mind you, I'm not. But Adrian, my editorial is that Adrian's beatable. Mm-hmm. And he was beaten by a guy named Rory Byrne. And I wrote, it's a really interesting story about Rory Byrne and where he came from and the differences between Adrian and Rory couldn't be more drastic.
Right.
And Rory Byrne, if you're not familiar, was the guy that designed the dominating Ferrari from 2000 to 2005 and beat Adrian at his own game. And Rory, is a genius. And I think to this day still consults with Ferrari. So anyway, he's beatable.
He's beatable.
So then Graham asks, hi, Todd, Paul, Grace. Well, Grace isn't here, but I know she hears in spirit. A question regarding starting from the pit lane. When starting from pit lane, is the car permitted to do some warm-up sighting lap? Is this F1 or do other series like IMSA, WEC do the same? Should the car be allowed to do the warm-up lap? Keep up the great work. Paul?
Well, the rules are different from each series, right?
Yep.
I know in SRO a couple of years ago, we got a penalty in a race that they said we had to start from pit lane, and we enacted a rule that was then taken on where they allowed us to do the warm-up lap, then pull into the pit lane, and because it was a 2 formation lap race, and we were allowed to go. Otherwise, people had always, up until that point, just stopped to pit lane with no warm-up. So we asked for, allowance to actually be part of a warm-up lap to be able to, even though we're starting from pit lane. So that is now kind of like a normal thing. In IMSA, generally you don't start from pit lane for any good reason. You'd always just start at the back of the pack. The only reason to start from pit lane is if you literally have a problem right then and there and you can't pull out. And so then you kind of didn't have that option to do that anyway. In Formula One, I'm not sure.
I don't think they do get to do the sighting lap.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure.
I could be wrong on that, but I don't think they do. I think they stay in the garage while the formation lap is done.
Right. Not the formation lap. But I think they are allowed to do those drive-through pit lanes.
When pit lane is open,
right,
they can go out, come back into pit lane. I think they can do that. Yeah.
And to some degree, starting from pit lane isn't the worst thing because they can turn those blankets up pretty high. And when the cars do their formation lap, they're actually losing
temp. Yep.
Temperature. And then they sit on the grid and they blankets going down. You saw Alonso in those first couple of laps. He actually, he wasn't losing. He was gaining on the back pretty well on this. So he wasn't at a detriment at that point.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that does it for this podcast. We've got Monaco coming up this weekend, Paul. We love Monaco.
Yes.
It's very special. I'm excited to do the review of that next week. So watch this space. If you like this podcast, go to your favorite player, give us a good rating. You can go to theparkformay.com, share your opinion on this review, and a huge thank you to our Patreon supporters. We could not and would not do this podcast without you. So I really appreciate your support. Very grateful for your support. And we will be back, Paul and I, to talk about, as Paul often refers to it, as the Monaco.
Or has never referred to it ever.
He's never referred to it that way, folks. But anyway, we'll be back next weekend to do it all over again. Until that time, next week, we will be back. This is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camper, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
It's not what I feel I've got to prove at all. I don't really want to prove anything. I started as an amateur with no idea or no intention of becoming world champion. I was curious to find out what it was like to drive a car fast, to drive on a certain circuit, to drive a certain type of car.